Hi guys, and welcome to A Little Bit of History with Bee. I recently did a short about the history of filet crochet, which people seemed fond of. However, there were quite a few details I left out, so I wanted to make a more in-depth video on this. Also, considering how well it does, I would like to make it into a series. Now, we know filet crochet is a rather newer style of crochet from the 19th century, and it originated as an imitation of filet lace, also called darned netting. And as with many things that are called imitations, it was often looked down upon as a cheap copy of lace. Doing some digging on filet lace, I found that according to the National Museum of American History, which has a very extensive collection, back in the 1600s, members of royalty, the aristocracy, and the Catholic Church were the main consumers for fine laces. We have Queen Elizabeth wearing a Reticella cuff. We also know Catherine de' Medici and Mary Queen of Scots apparently had particular affinities for lace, and supposedly filet lace was among them. Now, the terminology for lacework can be varied, not just because of the various types of lace that exist, but also the fact that techniques were being developed in different countries. Filet lace went by many names. The French called it filet, which was a term for net, and in its final form in Italy, it was called lattice. It has also been traced back to the 14th century when it was called opus araneum in medieval Latin, which translates to spiderwork. The term spiderwork seems to correlate with pieces that are finer and much more elaborate in design than what was the standard. While the exact origins of filet lace are unknown, it is very commonly believed to have been inspired by fishing nets. We can see some of the first known inspirations from fishing nets being translated into textiles in Egypt during the 4th dynasty. In this picture from the Giza project at Harvard University, there is a recreation of a beaded dress found in a tomb. The net pattern is unmistakable and very prominent. The original dress was dated to somewhere between 2551 BC to 2528 BC. There was also some beliefs that something very close to filet lace originally came from Egypt, but it was a bit unclear and I wasn't able to find too much on that. Now, some of the earliest recorded cases of filet lace can be found in the 13th century. The pieces mentioned were described as being made using a fine netting and squares being filled in with stitches. Here we have a cutting of an original hairnet found in a Hessian grave that is dated to the 13th century. Now, it's nothing like the hairnets of today, which are mainly used to keep environments sanitary. These intricate designs were made of silk and were worn mostly by Hessian female aristocrats. Now, due to aging and the cutting of the piece, we don't see too much of the full design, but you can actually find a recreation on notisanet.wordpress.com, which I will link down below, along with all of my other references if anyone wants to do their own research. I also found a book published in 1880 called Lace, Ancient and Modern, written by Mrs. C. D. Beebe. She found that there was a piece of spiderwork dated from the 13th century in the Bach collection of the South Kensington Museum in England. Now, I was unable to find a recording of this myself, but she does include a picture of this in her findings. So, while we might not know the exact time this type of lace came into existence, it seems like the 13th century is a safe bet. And I would dare say maybe even the 12th century because it can take some time for new techniques to get noticed and spread among the population, especially when your main source of information is word of mouth, local newspapers, and whatever books or writings are around if you knew how to read. Now, with filet lace, before you can start working on a pattern, you first have to make the net, or have it pre-made. You traditionally start with a square mesh net, originally silk, but eventually replaced with linen, which is then filled in with a variety of stitches. The most popular being the linen stitch, darning stitch, and running stitch. You can see the process in this picture from the Filet Museum of Villa La Magia. And here is a close-up of the linen stitch. Now, if you're making the net yourself, you're going to need tools like the shuttle and gauge stick to keep the squares even. And before kits like this were made widely available, the net was typically bought from lace makers. Naturally, things this detailed that have thousands of hours of manual labor behind it tend to be on the pricier side. According to the Smithsonian, in 1685, a cravat would cost 4.5 times the annual salary of a servant. In this picture from the Bowes Museum, we have a Venetian needle lace cravat to get a sense of how much lace we're talking about. I was not able to find the annual salary of a servant in 1685, but it makes sense that it was mostly high society buying lace. Much like many things in the 19th century, lace making was automated with machinery, and the introduction of cotton led it to become a little more affordable and was utilized by the middle class. These days, you can go to a website called Filet Lace by the Sea, which is super cute, and get a 9-foot by 20-inch lace net for about $22. much more manageable, and for someone who wants to try their hand at filet lace, a decent enough price. Naturally, if you're looking for handmade lace today, it's still going to be up there in price. For example, a wedding veil can range from about $300 to $700 US, of course, depending on the style, amount of lace, and detail. I'm sure that price can skyrocket with no problem. Now, somewhere along the line in the 19th century, someone took a look at filet lace and said, I bet you I can crochet that, as I'm sure we've all said at one point or another. The nice thing about filet crochet is that you're basically making the net as you go with your hook. You start with a chain of however long you want your piece to be and how many squares you'll need, and work back and forth in rows from the bottom of the piece to the top. When you want a square filled in, you do 2 double crochets in US terminology, or a treble crochet in UK terminology, into the chain space instead of a chain 2, and you rinse and repeat. Now, despite being able to achieve a similar look to some filet lace, it just did not have the same air of exclusivity and desire, at least to the wealthy that saw traditional lace as still more high class. That is, until Queen Victoria picked up the craft of crochet and promoted buying crochet lace from Irish women to support them during the Great Famine of 1845 to 1852. Now, that instance is specifically for Irish crochet lace, which is an imitation of old Venetian point. However, with the overall boost to crochet's popularity, this did include filet crochet. In the 19th century, I was able to find a few resources showing filet crochet, but it was a little difficult to track down initially because of its many different names. For example, in this book, My Crochet Sampler by Frances Lambert, that was published in 1844, Miss Lambert uses the term open crochet. She also makes reference that this type of stitch is best used for purses. We can also see filet crochet being used in combination with other stitches to make pieces more dynamic and to make use of negative space. Miss Marie Louise Kurzman, in her book Miscellaneous Designs for Crochet Work, published in 1883, shows us the use of netted crochet to make a border and create some negative space in a doily. We also know that it continued to be popular into the 20th century. In 1914, there were 2 books published by the Priscilla Publishing Company called the Priscilla Filet Crochet Book No. 1 and No. 2. You can actually find copies of them archived with the Smithsonian. The Priscilla Publishing Company, later known as Modern Priscilla, was a popular magazine in the States that ran from 1887 until 1930. They were widely known for their crafting patterns that ranged from knitting to needlework to crochet, among other home-related topics. It continued to remain popular throughout the 1900s when it was used for doilies, decorative curtains, tablecloths, even showing up in apparel eventually, like baby blankets, tops, and dresses, particularly in the 70s. We see the emergence of a lot of shirts, beach cover-ups, and dresses for women. Eventually, more recently, there's been a lot of interest in filet crochet with the flower top making its rounds and a lot of people trying out the vintage patterns. So while filet crochet might be an imitation of lace, I think its versatility makes it a great craft to have in your toolkit. I also personally find a lot of beauty in artwork made of lines. It's how I've always drawn, and at some point I got tired of being asked why my works weren't complete, so I kind of gave up on drawing. But finding filet crochet made me realize that not liking the way shading looked didn't make my drawings any less complete than others. So if you're feeling adventurous, consider giving filet crochet a go or even making your own patterns. It's actually much easier than you might think, but certainly no less rewarding. And if you've made it to the end of this video, I want to say thank you for taking the time to hang out with me. If you like the content, you can give me a thumbs up or a follow. If you have questions or if you'd like to know more about any other form of crochet, feel free to drop them in the comment section. Until next time.